Welcome home, where we provide information, inspiration, and motivator after motivator after motivator. We have Loretta Tayar with us today. How you doing, Loretta?
I'm well, thank you, Cedric. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. I'm doing quite well. You seem to be talking to me from your kitchen. Where are you from?
I'm from Brooklyn, New York.
Okay. Well, and were you always in Brooklyn?
Yes, I grew up in Brooklyn. I lived, my parents have owned their house in Bay Ridge forever. They got it when I was 3 months old. And as you can see, I'm super old. So that's a long time. And, I moved out on my own. I moved to another section of Brooklyn. But then I wound up coming back to my parents' house to take care of my mother who has Alzheimer's disease. So I have we used to spend summers in New Jersey, but for the most part I've lived here, pretty much the bulk of my life.
And what was life like for you growing up in Brooklyn? Talk about a regular childhood day in Brooklyn. Well, paint that picture for those of us who may have never been to Brooklyn before.
Okay, so Brooklyn is an extremely diverse place, but not where I grew up. I grew up in a very in the 70s it started to get a little bit more diverse. I'm half Syrian, half German. So the Syrian side of me, the Arabic side, was like, not many people had seen too many Arabs in Brooklyn in the 1960s and 70s and even into the 80s. So it got so it's
What did it?
very diverse, but
Yeah. Now,
It wasn't too diverse, but now it's much more diverse.
okay. Did you see any, or did you notice any sort of tension because you all were new to the community, or was it just a regular everyday thing?
No, it was fine. We you don't know me for years and years and years, but I'm socially awkward and a little bit rigid. But for the most part, we had a lot of friends. There was a lot of kids growing up. We did an awful lot of stuff, and we always had a good time. Growing up in Brooklyn is a lot different nowadays. Here we would get up in the morning, have our breakfast. If we went to school, we all walked to school together. Everybody on the block had multiple children. All the children walked together. All the children played after school together. They played, they had to come in and do whatever their family rule was. So say, for instance, the family rule was you come home like ours. We had to come home, have our snack, do our homework, and then we can go out and play. So, and change our clothes because we had, I had my earlier education was in private Catholic school. And
Okay.
then when I went to high school, I went to the public high school.
Okay. And so what was so it seems like you were having a pretty fun childhood. There were things to do all over the place.
All over the place. We had boundaries, like when we were little, we would, if you know Brooklyn, you know that there's a lot of street lamps and there's parking signs all over the place for alternate sided street parking and all these parking rules. So we would have boundaries, like we would say, okay, you can go from this pole to this pole if we were little kids. When we got to be older kids, then we could go within a block radius, and then as we got older, we can maybe do 3 or 4 blocks, or we can call up and say, if we came in and said to our parents, oh, we're all going to the park to play, then we could go to the park and then come back. So there was a lot more freedom, and everybody was always playing out in the street. There would be some parent watching, everybody was more, everything was really more community in that way because all the kids were outside playing. So somebody would be on the stoop watching. If you want to cross the street and your parent, somebody was there, so they would help you cross the street if you were little. There was always, because the mother stayed at home back then. This is how old I am. My mother went back to work when I was in 7th grade. So what was I, like 12? So, people were home. And if their parents weren't home, they just left you a note that said, go to Mrs. Clifford's house or go to Mrs. Massey's house. I'll be home in a little while,
Right. So it was a little bit of a different time than what we have today, where you got cars flying up and down the street. Everybody's double parked, sometimes even triple parked.
Well,
And
we had all that because I'm not so old that it was horse and buggy, but no, but they were used to it. People were used to the fact that they had to slow down and they had to stop. If we were playing stickball in the street and somebody was up to bat, then the car just had to wait for a minute until the play was made. Now,
right,
who knows if anybody would be willing to make that sacrifice?
right, or even sometimes people might think, why are these kids in the street? Instead of having a sense of understanding that, hey, this kids live here, they play outside, and me driving through is just that. I'm just driving through. But these kids live here.
Exactly.
Do you see that level of a difference in our communities today?
Huge difference. So we never had play dates. Like, I don't know how parents live their lives with the amount of play dates they have to show for their kids too. And we went everywhere by foot, and then we mostly played with everybody on the block. So everybody had kids. We were all out in the street. We had a back alleyway between our house. So the little ones would play in the alleyway and, the bigger ones would play outside in the street. Oh, but we would always go to this one or that one's house, whoever was around.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you were around during lunchtime, then the mother fed you a tuna sandwich. Wouldn't she fed her kids a tuna sandwich?
Right.
It wasn't that insular thing, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like everybody was always at somebody's house, or they were like, my mother always wanted to watch her children. She had 5 kids. She always wanted to watch them. So she would invite everybody's kids over to her house because she wanted that level of supervision,
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we always had a million kids over at our house,
Right. And your dad and your dad, was he always working somewhere? And what was that like? What did your dad do for a living?
So my dad was an entrepreneur. He came over from this country when he was a teenager. He came on a student visa to go to college, and he came from Syria.
Okay.
So he started his own painting business when he was 20 something. And then when he got, he set up a goal to not be doing painting by the time he was a certain age, because, it's a lot of hard work, and he would do exteriors and interiors, he did everything, and he's very athletic. So then he did contracting, he did fire adjusting, he did real estate brokering, and so whatever he got his license in just about everything. Back then it was you had a lot of different opportunities. Now everything's kind of regulated to death. But so he worked 6 days a week. He would leave the house around 6 a.m., come home around 6 p.m. He worked for himself. He worked in his own office, and he worked those hours 6 days a week. And then he would come home, get showered, spend some time with the family, have dinner, go to bed. He was an early to bed, early to rise kind of person. Right. And then on Sundays, it was family day. So Sunday, he would come home from work on Saturday, and then same thing, go grocery shopping, whatever, do what you had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And on Sundays, we'd all pile in the car and go somewhere.
So let me ask you, what were some of the things that you learned early in life? What were some of the lessons that your mother taught you, that your father taught you, that still stick with you today?
So they taught me a belief that there was never anything you couldn't accomplish if you put your mind to it and you put some effort into it.
Right. Okay.
I don't believe in that now. Does that sound bad to say as a motivational person? I think that we have biological impediments, and we might not be able to do everything we want to do.
Talk about that. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that there's a lot of things that people will never be able to do. And when you tell somebody you could do this no matter what, then that makes it a failure on the person's part if they haven't figured out a way to get it done. But say, for instance, you were born with one leg. You would not be walking per se upright unless you had an assist. You could have a prosthetic leg, or you could have somebody give you crutches, or you could have somebody hold you up and walk.
Mhm.
but you biologically won't walk without an assist. So that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean that you won't get where you want to go. Maybe you'll crawl, maybe somebody will help you. I think that the thing that you have to realize is that when you set a goal and you want to meet it, it really is about how you maneuver with your goal. It's
Right.
more about how you take care of yourself to meet your goal than it is about saying just like, well, just muscle through this and you'll get through it.
Right.
There's
And
some things you might not ever be able to do, but you can do them. You could do other things that might get you to the same place.
right. And so what I also hear you saying is that it's important to have a level of, realism in your perspective. So, the ideal sort of proverbial lessons that anybody might give you is a great thing, but you also want to be realistic with yourself about your expectations, because number one, we're not all perfect, and we're not all meant to be everywhere at all times, and so we got to look at that as well.
So I actually think differently. I
Hmm.
think that it's not, I think that what you have to do with yourself more is learn to forgive yourself. When things don't turn out the way you want, I think you should have wild imaginations. I think you should try to make every dream come true. I think that whatever you imagine, you should go full force on it if it's something you want to do. But if you fall short of that, don't beat yourself up. Go, oh, God, this is how far I got. Amazing. Or, wow, you know what? I've been doing it this way for so long and I got this far, but let me try to do it some other way because I really want to reach this goal. It's a
Right.
matter of taking stock in, you have a fantasy, your hopes and dreams are these really fantastic ideas, and then how do you get them? And then also, how do you, if you don't get them, how do you treat yourself if you didn't get there?
Right. Right. And I think that that's
And
absolutely huge.
the fact that what we do all the time, I think, yeah, I think so too. That's the one thing nobody ever talks about when they're talking about setting goals and meeting um, life goals. Like, listen, you know, there's always going to be a way to do something, but it might not be exactly what you thought it was. And you might have to abandon the plan halfway through, regroup. Like life's a journey. You know that already. It's more about the journey than it is about the destination. So I think that the one thing that nobody ever talks about when they talk about motivation is the what do you have to forgive yourself when you had to make compromises on the way, or when it didn't turn out exactly as you wanted it.
Hmm.
Is that still a valid outcome? And I think it is.
Without a doubt. I don't know if we do enough self forgiveness in our society, and so I think that that's a major point that you just made, is that we need to remember to forgive ourselves. It doesn't mean that you're any more or any less, but did you do that? Did you cover that benchmark with yourself? Are you treating yourself properly?
So I only started doing that when it came time to taking care of my mother. When
Mm.
I took care of my mom, I had her home with me for 5 years.
Why?
And because she really wanted to stay home, I gave up my home to live with her. And she really wanted to live in her house. We renovated the house so that she could live in there. But her needs became less about mobility and more about the kind of her needs wound up being more than I could provide. In
Okay.
other words, like her needs were that she wanted to stay in her house, but that didn't encompass what about me, like how much could I do every single thing for her because she
Mhm.
couldn't do it on her own anymore. And the future of how progressive the disease is and where's that going to take her and her needs. And I was already burning out. So I had to, somebody spent an awful lot of time talking to me regularly about placing her in assisted living and what the benefits were and what the benefits were going to be to me.
Right.
And that sounded dirty and horrible, right? Like, and
Mhm.
selfish. How could I be talking about me when somebody has a terminal disease and their only wish is to do this one particular thing, which is just sit in their house.
Mhm.
And it became, when I knew I couldn't do it anymore and that I couldn't provide for her for my own mental health issues, as well as for the fact that she really wasn't getting a comprehensive life where she was here.
Right.
In order to place her into a home, I had to forgive myself. And that
Right.
was the first time when I really thought about that conflict. And everything that I do now, I do it, which is why I bring it up so early in this interview, is you got to forgive yourself. Your hopes and your dreams may not come off the way you want them to.
Mhm.
But how do you reconcile that with how life really is? You know, when we talk about being motivated to get something done, we think of it in a very linear way. We think of somebody who has an idea, expounds on that idea, gets charged up by it emotionally, really thinks that it'll make a difference, and then runs towards that goal, which is great if that happens. But most of us do this, right? Like, you know, life
Right.
comes up, maybe they have a goal and then they had a child. Maybe they had a goal and then they went broke. Maybe they had a goal, got so much money, got distracted from their goal. Like, you don't know. You
Right.
don't know. So I think one of the things about that we don't really talk about in terms of motivationing is the fact that these goals typically don't happen in a straight line, and they typically take years to fruition. So life is still happening. So you got to kind of give yourself a break and say, look, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it in the time it takes to do it, not the time I think it should take to do it.
Right.
And maybe in the way I want to do it, but in the way that it actually happens.
Right. And you see, that's another great tenet in this conversation, that for one, adults all across America can benefit from revisiting this morning, is that, you know, where you're going in life, you can see a straight path to it, but you've got to know that there's going to be a dozen ups and downs on the way to achieving your actual goal. And for a lot of people, I actually talked to an adult at a career fair who felt like, you know, he gave up at the first sign of adversity and he never recovered from that. You know?
So, and I think that that's so important to understand, that when you have those kinds of adversity, this is a true story I'm going to tell you now, Cedric. And this was prior to me understanding about how life really works. When I was younger, I was in school, and I'm the fourth out of 5 children.
Okay.
And so my brother, who's younger than me, is a mathematical whiz. He can do anything about math in his head, like he's amazing. But that's his main skill. Like, he really is good with that.
Mm-hmm.
And it showed from day one. Like in second grade, he was getting every math award there was. So he was always much more advanced than I am in those kind of analytics. And then I had 3 brothers and sisters above me. So in essence, even though I was the 4th, intellectually I was probably the 5th or 6th, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I never grew up thinking that I was particularly bright, because there was a lot of shining stars, people who read better than me, people who analyzed math better than me. But the truth is, I wasn't far behind. Not only was I not far behind, I wasn't behind in really anything. When you take it outside the broad spectrum, like, this is just the truth. When we graduated high school, I don't know if you had it in Ohio, but when you graduate here in New York City, there's like a ranking in your school. So in my class, there was 997 or something, just under 1,000 students.
Right.
And I was ranked 98 out of 1,000 students. So that's the top 10%, right?
Yeah, that's great.
You would think, right? But now when you look at it, my brother, the math guy, was ranked 3rd out of 1,000 something students, right? 1,000 students, right? Mm-hmm. My sister was ranked, I don't know, 6th or something. Mm-hmm. The next ranking was my other brother, who ranked the next worst ranking he was in the 30s. He was like 36. So if you look at it, right, like where everybody's looking at a ranking, mm-hmm. and you look at 36 to 98, you think you're doing bad.
Right.
even though you're not, right? But
Right.
that's perspective. When you have a narrow perspective, you don't really understand. So when I would go to college, say, I would go to college thinking I was like way behind everybody, and then the colleges would want to sign me up
Right.
because I wasn't really way behind everybody. I was way behind my family,
Right.
but not in a devastating way. But because there's no perspective when you're younger and you don't really understand all that stuff. So so anyway, so here's the point of the story. So here I am, right, thinking that I'm not doing well academically because I'm not reading, I'm not, doing things. But I was learning disabled, which nobody knew about in the 60s and 70s. Nobody ever knew anything about that. So they were just starting to learn about it in the
Right.
70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So always in my family, no matter what, the conversation was always you were going to go to college and you were going to finish college.
Mm-hmm.
There was no room for anything else. So of course I went to college. I went to the college of my parents' choice. And just like all my brothers and sisters did, and I dropped out the first year. I
Why?
dropped out like the first semester. And then it was the big family joke because like I would drop out of school more than I would be in school, but I couldn't do it.
Right.
But I wanted to do it. So I would go to a different school. I would drop out of that school, go to a different school, drop out of that school. So it turns out that in college overall, I don't remember how many times I dropped out, but it was between 4 and 6. I think it definitely 4, probably 6.
Right.
But it was so many years that it took me 19 years to graduate with my undergraduate degree, dropping out for years and years years in between.
Wow.
But I had to seek out the answers myself, right? I had to go and get tested. I got some bad testing advice, then I got some really good testing advice. Then I did that.
So let's slow it down a little bit because what you're describing right now, I think applies to a lot of people in our society. And the first thing that I want to revisit is how you weren't the least of your class by any means at all.
No.
But you still had to deal with the analytics. You have to deal with the numbers, the rankings, the attempts to quantify where you really were. But
Yeah.
I don't think that anybody's quantification of your actual talents was accurate.
No, it was crazy because when I would come into school, I would walk into school as being the fourth, and they would look at me and go, now my brother, who was right above me, like in age, was like the class clown, and my two sisters who were above me were extremely studious students, very quiet, did all their work, all their homework. My brother was a bit of a cut up. He did whatever made people laugh, which might not have been his homework. But so when I came into school, they would just look at me and go, "Oh, you're a Tyar, and which kind are you?" They just look at me like, "Are you gonna be a mess up, or are you gonna do the work?"
Right.
So they had high expectations for me, and when I wasn't like the other ones, they really couldn't understand it. Like they didn't have anything in there, so they would like give me a real hard time about certain things. They'd be like, well, your sister could do this or your brother could do that. How come you can't do that? And even when I went into high school, which was really funny, I took Spanish and I loved it. I wanted to speak Spanish. And my brother, because he was more advanced than I was in my very same Spanish class. He got like kind of skipped ahead. He couldn't really speak Spanish at all, but he could take tests really well. So I was speaking Spanish to people, but I was testing lower than him. So he would get like a 98 and I'd get like an 87. And the teachers would be like, why can't you be like your brother? And I would say, but he doesn't even speak Spanish. He just tests well. You're having this conversation with me in Spanish.
Right.
You couldn't do that with him. Right. So it was a real hard thing because the judgments and the comparisons obviously don't help anybody. Everybody's an individual.
Right. And I wonder from just a realistic point of view, how many people are out there right now being compared to their brothers and sisters, or being compared to whoever came before them, maybe been in their family and did a great job, or maybe they did a horrible job? And what would you say to somebody who's going through that right now?
So I would say to hang in there, because there are other parts of your life where individuality matters. And it might not be high school, and it might not be with that teacher, it might not be grade school, but it doesn't matter, because when somebody unlocks your individuality, either you do it yourself or somebody recognizes you, it feels great and it will happen. And it doesn't, you are an amalgamation. You're not who anybody says you are. You know, you're who you are, right? But people who are young don't know who they are yet. Right. They just don't, because they don't have that. So you have to recognize that there's going to be a time where somebody does recognize you because you are out of it, like you're out of the milieu where you were always compared. So like when I was doing lab work with this particular professor one time, and I was an undergraduate, and I came home, my phone was ringing, and I went and picked up the phone. That's how old I am. We had to pick up a phone. And with a
hold on. Was it one of the rotaries where you got to do like this?
No, that was my childhood. No, it was a regular phone.
I got it. You just hit the buttons. The buttons that actually go up and down. That's different too.
Yeah, we're in the 90s now. Cordless phone.
Okay.
So it was my professor who had never called me at home, but he was looking at the data that I presented in class, and he just looked at me and he said, so he didn't even say, "Hi, Loretta, this is Professor whatever." I pick up the phone and I'm like, "Hello," and he's like, "You're a scientist. Did you know you were a scientist?" And I said, "No." He goes, "How has nobody ever told you that you're a scientist?" I say, "Nobody's ever told me I was a scientist." He goes, "You've never had a teacher that told you you were a scientist?" And I said, "No, never." He goes, "I don't know how that's possible." And it's possible because it's just the way life is, right? You don't always get, but there's going to be somebody one day who unlocks something in you in school terms, We're just talking about like school right now. But I guess in real life too, when you go for a job and stuff like that, I started evaluating myself based on evaluations I got. So when people said reliable, dependable, things outside the box, I took that and wrote it on my resume, because I didn't know who I was, but other people knew who I was. It's like how your young daughters might not know who they are, but you know who they are.
Right. But what I also really want to point out at this part of the conversation is that you actually were a pretty talented individual. And like you said, that had to be unlocked by different experiences. But it wasn't, number one, it really couldn't be, you really couldn't put a number on it. You really couldn't put a ranking on it, because for somebody to call you and say, "Did you know you were a scientist?" When I hear that, I hold that in high regard. That doesn't sound like somebody who's in 4th or 5th place out of 6. That sounds like somebody who has a top tier talent inside of them. And there's no less than 1 million people in America right now who they're listening to everybody around them. They might have a legacy of older brothers or relatives, and people saying, "Oh, where are you in the chain of achievement?" And that doesn't mean that there's not something great in them that's waiting to be unveiled. And that's what you're representing today. Ladies and gentlemen,
it's very difficult in the United States because we rank everything. And all of our grades are percentile ranked, which means where do you stand amongst your peers? Every single thing we test because of that. And we kind of pigeonhole people into these very specific ways of learning about them, which may or may not be the total picture, and probably is not the total picture. So you have to recognize that, especially in school, that's a big old bomb for kids, right? Because if kids are constantly the good kids, or constantly the cut up kids, or constantly the lazy kids, or whatever they want to, because people used to call me lazy all the time. You could never describe me as lazy if you ever saw me. I do more than anybody who has to do. If you give me something to do, I'm going to do it better than you thought. you were going to get it.
Right.
Like you can't call me like nobody could call me lazy. I
Right.
get up and I do everything I have to do better. But what my teachers would call me was lazy all the time because they didn't understand. And then when I couldn't read as well as others, then it would just be that I was being lazy, and obviously I could read. The nuances that we understand now and that we look for in people weren't there back then.
Exactly.
Nobody talked about, well, you don't read so well, but look at how great your comprehension is, or whatever.
Right.
They
Exactly.
don't talk like
Exactly.
that.
And that is another big concept that we're going to get into. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking to Loretta Tayar, who is a variety of culture and a variety of experiences that she's sharing with us today. It's very important to take time out to talk to people in our community who have as many experiences as she has, and who's willing to provide some wisdom to us. And so we have a lot more to get to, and we'll be right back after this brief message. All right, and we're back. So, Loretta, I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you a little bit right now about what it was like growing up with people really having a lack of understanding. You talk about there might have been learning issues that you were dealing with, or symptoms that you were displaying that were not being diagnosed because people were just thinking everything is everything. And when you say something like that, it reminds me of stories that I've heard in the past about somebody just always being labeled a bad kid. Oh, that's a bad
Um,
kid. That's a bad kid. That's a bad kid. But then when they get older and they deal with more experienced professionals, they come to find out, oh, this person has an attention disorder, or this person has, a different type of a learning disorder that we now understand and that we now know how to treat. But some of these people are grown. Some of these people, they're now 30, 40, and 50 years old, but for their whole life they were labeled, let's say, a bad person. They were labeled bad when all they really had was an attention disorder. Or they'll say this person has problems, but in reality they might be suffering from post-traumatic stress. And so,
yeah.
how do you feel in retrospect, knowing that there was a lack of understanding when it came to being able to see the real Loretta?
So I don't have any bad feeling about it, only because it was the time. Nobody understood it, nobody talked about it, nobody understood. And culturally in the time, people had larger families. My mother and father both came out of 8 and 9 children. you know and the parents did what the parents did. They lined everybody up, everyone got the same clothes. It was a very different time. What bothers me now is that we now understand that everybody in life is trying to progress and make their dreams come true. So if somebody's not progressing, name calling, attributing negative things to them is to me much more egregious as an adult to do to any human being, much less a child, because we now understand that there's much more room for individuality than there was when I was coming up. So
And
the
why do
fact
you think
that
that is?
people, what?
Why do you think that is? There's more room for individuality now than there was back then.
We understand it better. We understand that it's a possibility. We understand that, there have been huge trailblazers in things like, in all different ways of being. So now we understand that we might not know how or why it happens, but we intuitively understand that it does happen, that there are things that hold people back and there are things that make people different. We tried to mask all that stuff for years as a society, right? We didn't let people express their love affection for other same-sex people, or for not having a any kind of preference. Or we understand now that there's all different things, and we understand that every culture is a little different. So I think that because we have that understanding now, when adults and people in authority, like teachers, go back to the old nonsense ways of just saying, oh, well, you're just lazy, or you're just this and that, and it's negative, instead of trying to figure out what is it about this child that's making them not progress, or what is it about this human that's making them not progress. Because in my opinion, humans always want to progress. When you look at any baby, they don't just sit down on a chair and sit there until they're 21. No, they want to learn things, they want to do things, they want to see things. So when you see somebody who's not progressing, what does that mean? And then you also have to look at progress, right? If it's progress for you, is it necessarily progress for me? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
Like, just
It
because
is.
you want me to get 100, should I get 100 if I don't want to? Who knows?
Yeah, I think that if you're progressing, I think that affects me, and so your progress is also my progress.
Yeah, if you embrace it, right? I mean, if you don't, the whole thing about this whole conversation is that I want to really get across is that things happen in the time that they're supposed to happen. And unfortunately, we put pressures on ourselves. So for instance, this is the truth. I graduated college in 19 years. I was 36 years old by the time I graduated college. I was working full time. I had a career, but all I ever wanted was education. And I didn't care about the piece of paper as much. I really just wanted to know things.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to be enlightened in that way. So college was very, very important to me. Now, was I considered, a flunky in my family for not getting through college in the 4 years it took, or less, that it took everybody else in my family? Yeah, but guess what? I have a degree. I love the knowledge I have. But now, when it came time, once I got really good at school, I did my master's degree in 4 years, not because I was working full time and going to school part time. I could have done it in the prescribed 2 years if I was rich and didn't have to work. So once I got the hang of school, and once I understood what it would take to get through school, I could do it no problem.
Right. Wow.
But if you had told me that if I could only go in this one direction and never finish, and I had to finish, college within a certain time frame or limitations or whatever, I mean, then I would have never been on that journey, and I would have never had the ideas that I had and the information that I gained.
So let me get this straight. Your adversities when it came to education, they didn't start for you when you got to college. This is something that you dealt with for the whole entire elementary school years, junior high school, and high school, and it pretty much really didn't go understood. But then when you got to college, you didn't let any of that stop you. And
I
you
did let it stop me. I dropped out many times.
right, but what I'm saying is that you continued to apply yourself, and you
Well, I
continued.
always had a dream, and I continued to try to find a way to make my dream happen. That's what I'm talking about. You got to
Mhm,
forgive yourself if it doesn't go the way you think it's going to go. You
mhm.
got to forgive yourself if you give up and you take a break and you go back at it in a different way. You got to just be okay. Like my friend used to always ask me, like, how do you do it? Like, you're like the oldest kid in school. Like, doesn't that bother you? And I
Mhm.
would say, yeah, but I'm not going to stop doing what I want to do. I want to get a degree. I want to learn this stuff. I
Right.
want to know things. So it's it's a noise. It's a static. Now, I have attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity. I also have comorbid other disabilities like dysgraphia, dyslexia. I have a bunch of stuff going on. and it becomes extremely difficult for me to like sit through a test and get all that done. So I had to like really study in a different way, because sitting in classrooms next to somebody who say was tapping a pen while taking an exam,
Mhm.
I had to overcome that in me, because I can't just turn around and tell 12 kids to stop tapping their pencils, right? Because that's what they do during a test, and nobody's going to give me a special room to sit in. I did that, as a disabled person. I could have gotten that, but it didn't get me any good results. So I stopped that. But you have to kind of just, I've had to take a lesser grade on an exam because I've been distracted by people. But, okay, so I got an 87 instead of a 92 or whatever. But, you just got to do what you got to do. And then you got to, like I said, you got to like learn to go, okay, in that situation, it was the best I could have done. So I did it.
How did you change your study habits to succeed?
Oh, I took I took full responsibility. And then what I did was this. So when I got a good diagnosis of all the things that I would do, they gave me a list. I got a bad diagnosis that said drop out, you'll never, you're disabled, but we'll never figure it out and you're too old. And that was at 26. And then I got a better diagnosis, probably late 20s, early 30s, that said, no, you have all these things and this is what you need to do. And I brought it to the Office of Disabilities and they gave me a special room to take tests in and stuff. But I found that it wasn't advantageous to me because the people in the special rooms were making noise outside the special rooms. So what I had to do was, what I did was this. I had to leave my, I don't know what, hubris or something aside. I went to each professor and I would ask the professor on the first day of class, and I would say, if I want to get an A in this class, how do I need to study for this class?
Mm-hmm.
And whatever the professor told me to do, that's what I did. So one professor told me, you have to read this textbook at least 5 times before any exam for you to be able to. You have to show up to every lecture. You have to have all your labs in and your notes. And so that's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I got an A, which was astounding because, this wasn't my strong point. But after a while, I didn't have to ask the professors that anymore. I would just do the most I could do. So it took me like playful study, like 24/7. I would sleep for maybe 6 hours a night, and then I would study in the morning. I would get up early before work and study, and then I would do something called playful study that I did, which was like teach all the people around me like what I was learning, so that
Right.
I'd be like, oh, you can't believe what I just learned in class yesterday, blah blah blah, and then we'd talk about it, and that would get more into it.
Right.
And then I would go home and study, like, so we would joke around about it. We would do things like I would engage the rest of my coworkers who were great, but but that's what I had to do. I had to just ask, like, how do I wouldn't take it for granted.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then you just have to do the most you can do and not the least.
Right. I think it's pretty cool that you decided to learn through teaching others. I think that's a really good tactic to put out there.
Oh, we had so much fun because some of the subjects was so hard. When I was learning about learning and behavior, which is like a real heavy duty, like how do organisms learn and how do they behave? It's huge. I mean, it's like stuff you never even thought about in your life. So you have no like reference point to it. So when we would learn about all these lab animals and stuff, and we would learn about like for instance, like how do people overdose when they've been taking drugs all these years? Why do they all of a sudden overdose? And we learned about that in school from a biological standpoint. So I would go into class like the next day and go like, oh, you know how rock stars overdose always in hotels? This is
Right.
the reason. And
Tell us.
then it would start like a whole thing, and everybody was in on it. I mean, it was just like joke and fun, but it was really informative and also helped me digest. And then we did study groups with the kids in school on lunch hours or whatever. But you just got to do the most. But if I had limited myself in time and scope, then I would have been out because it took me so long to graduate.
Right. Well, it's funny you just said that because yesterday we were literally talking about drugs and drug abuse. And
Wow.
so when you say that you learned about why people overdose all of a sudden, I want to connect the dots between what we're talking about today in this juncture and what we talked about yesterday. So how is it that a rock star might overdose all of a sudden?
So it has to do with the fact that they're not used to the surroundings in which they're taking the same level of narcotics. So because we do something called habituate, we get used to an environment. So all the stimuli in that environment become like non-noticed. So when you're in an environment that you're constantly in, say for instance, somebody shoots up in their living room every day. They will, to get the same amount of high, because their stimulation is all the same, will have to increase the amount of drugs they get into their system because they're used to everything around them. So they need more to make it salient for them. They need more to make it noticeable.
Wow.
However, if they go to a new environment, if you notice a lot of people overdose in new environments, all that stimulation is new. So everything becomes heightened. And when they put in the excess amount of drugs, say they're doing an intravenous thing, they overdose because they haven't habituated to that surrounding yet. So they could have used less narcotics and been safer. But the more narcotics you use, the less likely you are to be safe. So that's the reason why. That's the reason why.
Yeah.
In many instances.
That I just learned something new today. Thank you for teaching me that.
Yes.
Thank you.
So imagine me doing that, like in work, going, "Hey guys, guess what I just learned?"
Right. And over the course of 19 years, I'm so inspired by that. I am still in my journey through college, and I know a lot of other people who are still in their journey through college.
You're doing it. It happens. That's the cool thing about college. I was at some point just taking one class a semester because that's all I could do.
Right.
But nobody gave me a hard time about doing that. Maybe I would have been laughed at by other people, like in my family or whatnot. I doubt it. But in school, they don't care. If you show up for one class and do it for 10 years, they don't care as long as you pay your bill.
Right.
So the whole purpose of this topic was, what do you have your hopes and your dreams and you want to achieve those goals, but it's not necessarily linear, and you don't necessarily do it in the way that you think you're going to do it. But just keep doing it. Don't disrespect yourself in a way by giving up because it's not going the same way everybody else's journey went. Your journey is your own journey. It's going to go the way it's going to go. Who knows? We keep thinking that everything has to be planned and then executed. And then, because we watch a lot of TV, it has to be executed perfectly. If you ever watch Top Chef or anything like that, they get thrown out for like one extra cucumber seed on their plate. That could happen. Chances are it won't. Don't worry about all that stuff.
Right. Got to be able to go with the flow.
Yeah, and then and the flow might be like in your case. Maybe the flow is that you have children and then you get sidetracked and then later on you go back to it. Or maybe you have enough money to go to do your tuition, but then you get this awesome opportunity to do something else and you take that money and you do that. Doesn't mean that you don't go and do your other dream. Like you have dreams. We all can have many different dreams at one time.
Yep.
And we can juggle that. Or not, none of it's that big of a deal. Whatever you think your life path is going to be, who knows? But don't worry if it doesn't go the way you thought it was going to go. Enjoy wherever the hell you are. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Now, so we're out of college. You did a great job with that. Kudos to you. Did you also become a mother along the way?
I did. When I finished my graduate degree, I wanted to go on and become a doctor of psychology. I was going to get my doctorate in psychology. And I had decided that, I had always wanted to be a mother, always, always, always.
Mm.
And I didn't mind being married, but I didn't want to be married to the wrong person. So I didn't wind up finding somebody that I want to marry. So I decided that it was my time. I graduated when I was 40 from graduate school.
Congratulations.
So I decided that it was my time to parent. And I figured being a psychologist, I could, that's one of the professions where you could be old and be a psychologist. People just think that you're wiser.
Right.
If I wanted to be a basketball player, I wouldn't be able to do that
Right.
old. But so I decided I was gonna raise my family, and then I could go back and get my doctorate at any time. So that's what I did, and I adopted teens out of foster care, out of New York City foster care, and I've been a parent now for 13 years, and it's been great. Yeah. So that's how I didn't wind up. My goal was always to get a master's degree. I don't know why. I always thought that was like the coolest thing ever. So I love that I got it. I did not like getting it. Going to school for your master's degree is a lot worse than going for your bachelor's degree. But I'm so happy I have it. I love it. I'm glad I did it. But I'm so glad I'm a parent. I might not get to do my doctorate just because it's not my dream anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been a great journey being a parent, and I've got to use my education for my kids too. And the fact that I used to teach my kids all the time, because my kids, some of them didn't finish high school. Some of the ones that came to me, couldn't read well or couldn't do certain things well. How trauma and a lot of stuff affects the brain. So,
Yeah.
and I got them, like they all were able to decompress to a certain degree and really, blossom in beautiful ways. But the one thing I taught them was that college is a great goal and you can do it whenever you want. I was telling my story. It took me 19 years, and that there's nothing wrong. Your journey is your journey. You get to
Right.
into it.
So you're a hero. You're a hero today.
Not at all.
And no, absolutely, without a doubt, because not only did you push through, achieve what you wanted to achieve, you didn't just stop at a bachelor's degree, you got a master's degree. And that portion of your life, it's not all about college. And like you said, sometimes the end goal is the lesson. It's not the journey itself, it's the lesson that you get out of it. And so that lesson that you present today about pushing through is a testimony that can benefit us all. And so you went above and beyond in that endeavor, but then you did even more. You decided to become a parent to not just one child, but multiple children, and they were teenagers. And then you met them where they were, and you helped them to decompress, and you helped them to grow into stable adults. And I think that is absolutely phenomenal. How did it feel for you watching your children leave the nest?
Oh, so watching them leave the nest was hard. I remember when my youngest came to me and she was getting her first apartment, and she said, "Okay, I'm gonna get my first apartment." And I was so sad. I would be at work, like with little tears in my eyes, like my baby's leaving. And then, once the house was quiet and clean, then it was like, wow, this is great.
Right.
Because the one thing my baby told me when she was leaving, because she left me when she was like 22, I think. And she told me on the day she was moving out, she said, "Okay, I just want you to know, I'm moving out. But don't think I'm going to call every day, and don't think we're going to see each other all the time. I need my independence." And I said, we will call every day or every other day, and I'm sure we'll see each other. Don't worry about it.
Right.
So from that, of course we call every day. Now it's been, I don't know, 8 years or something. And she says to me one day, I get a text at like 1 a.m. It's been 26 hours. Where have you been? And she was the one saying, like, we're not going to call every day. So it's been an absolute joy. It's been a joy.
Okay, so we've got about a minute and a half left, and I have three questions that I need you to answer in that minute and a half.
Okay.
The first one is, what is survival to you?
I think it's just being able to live your life. I think a lot of people, you just got to survive enough to live your life.
Hmm. And what is success to you?
I think success is being able to meet your own goals.
Mm, okay. And what is greatness to you?
Um, I think greatness is when you. I think you're great when you can share. When you get to the point in your life where you can share and give back and do things for others.
Hmm. Without a doubt. See, here in my different type of world, I believe that there are three phases in life. And we have an objective to get to the third phase, which is greatness. A lot of people are stuck in the survival phase. There are a lot of people who are in the success phase, and that goes on for on and on and on and on. But it's also important that if you talk to people who are consider themselves any level of success, to get to the next level for them too, and that's greatness. And so you did a very great job answering those questions. And in summation of the things you shared with us today, I just want to let you know that your story is very inspirational for people to hear and to understand. The work that you've done has helped the community. It's helped your family. It's helped me. It's helped my family. It's helped my perspective. And I want to honor that today. I want to give you respect and praise while you're still living. Let you know that what you're doing is awesome, and your story will exist on the America's Next Motivator platform inside of a Pride Empowerment Network annals forever. And you, Loretta, not only receive your crown today, but you are one of America's Next Motivators.
Thank you, Cedric. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate such kind things coming from such a great person. Thank you.
Without a doubt. Thanks for joining us today. I'll talk to you later, okay?
Okay, great.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another installment of America's Next Motivator. I'd like for you to tune in tomorrow as we talk with a teacher in the public school system who's dealt with a variety of experiences. And he's going to talk to you about what his experience was like in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. His name is Mr. Harvey, and we're going to be talking to him tomorrow. Thanks. Bye-bye.